he was also in control of what was going to happen. There's a scripture over there in John 10 that basically says that Jesus said, no one takes my life from me unless I am willing for them to take it. And so Jesus knew he was going to be killed. He decides to go down anyway, and we need to understand how that's hitting the disciples. Keeping in mind that they're looking at, this is our king, this is the man that's going to get rid of all of these Romans, this is the man that's going to be set up in a physical kingdom, and now that he's telling us that he's going to be killed. This can't happen. If you look back up here at verse 15 in the same chapter, Jesus said to them, he says, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So they knew who Jesus was. They knew what his power was. They were the ones that witnessed all of the miracles and all that. And so we have to imagine then, in light of the confession that Peter just made, that I understand that you are the Son of God and you are the King. And then Jesus turns around and say, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be killed. Imagine how that struck them. Think about that for just a minute. If you had pinned all of your hopes and dreams on this man that we knew was the Son of God, and now that he says he's going to be killed, how in the world is he going to be able to set up this kingdom if he's dead? So there was lots of confusion here. So the purpose of the cross here is much more than just Jesus dying for the world, and we're going to get into that a lot more. But Jesus was aware of what was going to happen. He was in complete control of the situation. And the thing about it is that if he knew that he was going to die, if he wanted to avoid that, all he had to do is not go to Jerusalem. He could have said to the disciples, if I go to Jerusalem, they're going to kill me, so maybe we shouldn't go. If you knew that you were going to go to a certain town and be killed, would you go there? I wouldn't. But Jesus knew he was going to die, but yet he was going to go anyway. He could have said to the disciples, it's not going to go like we want in Jerusalem. Maybe we could just stay here in Galilee, or maybe go up a little bit north into Asia Minor, or maybe over to Rome, and maybe we'll be able to spread the word that way. But he didn't do that. If you look there close at that verse, he says that he must go to Jerusalem. This is not something that was an option in his mind. He said, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. All right. There's basically 5 points that I want to bring out of this. And the next one is, I want to talk about what am I hitting? The wrong one. There we go. I want to talk about the confusion of the cross. I'm going to spend a little time on this. Verse 22, then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. So this was the reaction that Peter had, and probably all the other disciples that were along with him. After Jesus explained that, hey, I'm going to be killed, Peter takes him aside and says, no, we're not going to let this happen. This cannot happen. If this happens, then we're not going to be able to set up the kingdom. So there's all kinds of reasons why we need to avoid this. So if we think about Peter's confession there in verse 16, and we compare that with what Jesus said was going to happen when they went to Jerusalem, and then think about Peter's reaction to this, and they've all seen the miracles, and so Peter was absolutely convinced that Jesus could avoid this if he wanted. If he didn't want to be killed, he didn't want to be killed. But he said, I'm going to be killed. But what's interesting is when Jesus reacts to this. And he says there in verse 23, he says, but he turned and he said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Wow, that's quite a statement. Now, if you compare that statement, if you go all the way back to verse 17. Jesus answered and said to him, him being Peter, he said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." In verse 17, he's blessing Peter. In verse 23, he's calling him Satan. Think about that contrast. Now, I don't know how much time went by, but I kind of get the feeling that not a whole lot of time has gone by from the time that Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Peter," and then calling him Satan. Why did Jesus react so strongly? I mean, why didn't he just kind of gently put his arm around Peter and kind of walk him away from everybody else and say, "Peter, listen, I appreciate the fact that you don't want me to die. But it's kind of obvious that maybe you don't know the full picture here. Let's sit down here and let me explain to you what's going to happen. But I appreciate your concern for me. But you just need to take my word for it, buddy, that this is what has to happen." Okay, that would have been one way to go. But that's not what Jesus did. He said, "Get behind me, Satan." Wow. That is quite a difference when you compare it to what he said in verse 17. He goes on and he says, "You are an offense to me." Some versions say, "You're a stumbling block to me." In other words, Jesus was saying to Peter, "You're in the way. This is not what needs to happen. You just need to let me handle this." And to be a stumbling block, to be an offense, is basically saying that Jesus was accusing Peter of tempting him. Now, when you think about what happened back in Matthew 4, remember the story there where Satan takes Jesus out and he says, "Look at all of the worlds here, or look at all of the cities, and look at all of the kingdoms here. And if all you can do is just bow down and worship me, then I'll give you all of this. That's all you got to do. You just got to bow down and worship me, and you can rule the world. We can shortcut this crucifixion thing. You don't have to die. All you got to do is just fall down and worship me, and we can get you where you want to be. We can get you to the point where you have glory and honor and all that." And what was Jesus' reaction to that? He said no. In that dialogue, it says that Jesus was tempted. Now, him being 100% human, 100% deity, I don't know to what degree the temptation was there, but at least it was there to some degree. And when Jesus was led up on that mountain and looked at all this and said, and Satan was trying to convince him to just bow down and worship him, that might seem like a tempting thing to do. And now then what we have Peter doing is basically the same thing. What Peter is doing is he's offering Jesus an avenue not to be killed. That's exactly what Satan did. And so what we can do is we can see the comparison between the two here. We can see how it is that Jesus reacted to Satan, and then we can turn around and we can look and we can see exactly the same thing in the way that he's reacting to Peter. And that's why he said, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter, you don't understand. You do not understand what's going to be going on here. Why would Jesus react so violently to this if he didn't view it as a real threat? In essence, he's saying, "Peter, don't tempt me. I have a mission, I have a purpose, and this is what I need to do. Don't tempt me." I would be scared down to my boots if the Lord called me Satan. I don't know exactly how Peter reacted to that, but I do think that Peter probably thought that he was doing the Lord's will, that he wasn't acting in a selfish way. He goes on there when he says in verse 23, "But he turned to Peter and he said, 'Get behind me, Satan.' He says, you are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men. I think if you ask Peter, Peter, do you think that you're doing what you think is best for this situation? Peter would probably say, yeah. Yeah, because he's the king and he's God, and we can't have him killed and still be able to complete the mission here. So I think Peter was probably had good intentions. But Jesus said, you are not mindful of the things of God. You are mindful of the things of men. And I think what we need to do is we need to understand that we can fall in the same trap. We can think that we're doing what God wants us to do, when in fact, maybe we're not doing what God wants us to do. And there is something about the human mind that is very, very good at rationalizing what we think is best and what we want. We are very good at that as humans, aren't we? I know I'm good at that. If I decide that I want something and I get focused on that, it's hard to talk me out of it. When it comes to spiritual things, though, we need to be very, very careful and make sure that we're being very, very objective. God has his purposes. God has his mission. God has the things that he is trying to accomplish. And I need to make sure that my own selfish desires and the way I think it needs to be done doesn't get in the way. And boy, I've seen that in a lot of people, and a lot of times I've seen that in myself. Peter thought, this can't happen. This is not going to work at all. So I'm going to step in here and I'm going to try to convince the Lord that he needs to go another direction. And don't we do that sometimes? Don't we do that sometimes? I talked to a young lady years ago who was not being as faithful as she should. And so I talked to her about it a little bit. And she says, well, I've been going out on the lake on Sundays with my friends, but that's okay because we're out there among nature and we think about all the beautiful things that God has made. And so, and I've prayed about this. And so, I'm okay with it. Doesn't sound to me like she's mindful of the things of God. It sounds to me like she's decided what she wants to do. She wants to go to the lake with her friends, and this is how she's rationalized it. And man, we are so good at coming up with justification if we want something bad enough, aren't we? So let's take a lesson here from Peter, and don't be too quick to second guess what it is that God has in mind for in a big picture and for us as individuals. One of the things that I've heard many people say, well, don't you think that the Lord wants me to be happy? What do you think? Don't you think the Lord wants me to be happy? Let me ask you this. When the Lord told Abraham to go offer Isaac, think that made him happy? Go like this. When Stephen was stoned, you think that made him happy? When Paul asked the Lord to remove that thorn in the flesh 3 times and the Lord said no every time, do you think that made him happy? What does that tell us about our happiness so far as the Lord is concerned? Our happiness is secondary. If we get it, that's great. But it's not our happiness that is the defining thing as to what's going to make God make his decisions and create his plan. It's not about my happiness. We've had situations here in this congregation where we've had people and we've talked to people and they've said, well, it just doesn't work for me. Well, it's not about you. Worship is about obedience. It's not about entertainment. And that's one of the things that we have got to get into our heads, that when we are here to worship the way that God said to worship. And I can't help but thinking when you see a lot of these mega churches and everything, and they've got all the bands and the light shows and the fog machines and all that, and it's just really going. It's about entertainment. That's what it's about. It's about entertainment. We are not, in this church, we are not about entertainment. We are about offering biblical worship to God in the way that God has determined that he wants it. So let's keep in mind here, don't get in the way. Don't let your personal preferences and your desires get in the way of the big picture of what God wants to do. It's not about your happiness. It's about obedience. Worship is about obedience. Say that. Worship. Oh, come on. Worship is about obedience. And just, if any of you are interested in getting a tattoo, that's what you need to get right there. Worship is about obedience. All right, let's kind of move on here a little bit. We've got a little bit of time here. I want to talk about the call of the cross here. In verse 24, what's happening here in verse 24 is Jesus is using the events there in verse 23, the interaction between him and Peter, and he's going to use that in verse 24 to kind of explain what it means to be mindful of the things of God. In verse 24 it said, Peter, you're not minding the things of God, you're minding the things of men. So Jesus is going to use this interaction to teach his disciples what it means to be concerned with the things of God. And what he says there in verse 24, then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Those three things. Let's think about those three things. Anything that you do to improve yourself is going to take three things. It's going to take sacrifice, it's going to take effort, and it's going to take commitment. If you decide that you want to go to college and you want to get an education so that you can better yourself, you can provide for your family, you can make a lot of money, it's going to take sacrifice, it's going to take effort, it's going to take commitment. There's not much that you can think about so far as improving your situation in life unless it takes sacrifice, effort, and commitment. If you want to have a good relationship with your wife or your husband, it's going to take sacrifice, it's going to take effort, it's going to take commitment. Things that are worth having are not cheap, and they don't come easy. So a lot of times we tend to try to want to convince ourselves that my relationship with God, I can be pleasing to God without a whole lot of that. But if you look at it, deny yourself, sacrifice, take up your cross, effort, follow me, commitment. Improving your spiritual life is no easier than improving any other aspect of your life. And we need to understand that if we are going to be mindful of the things of God, we are going to have to say no to certain things in our life. The call of the cross says that Jesus denied himself in order for us to have what we needed. Why did Jesus go to the cross? For his own benefit? What did he get out of that? Nothing. Jesus got nothing out of that. Turn over to the book of Philippians with me and look at chapter 2. And we're going to look at a couple of verses here that kind of really drive this point home, I think, in a very, very profound way. Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 5. He says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. Let's stop right there. Who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. So what is it that Jesus deserved, given this verse? He was equal with God. Well, what does God deserve? Honor, glory, praise. Jesus did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. But now then, look on a little bit later and look what he did. He says, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. So here in one verse, we're told that Jesus does not consider it robbery to be equal with God. That means he's God. He is deserving of honor and glory and respect and worship. He is deserving of those things. But he denied himself. Why did he do that? He denied himself because he looked at Charles and he said, Charles needs a Savior. And he looked at Dan and he said, Dan needs my help. And he looked at Arlie and said, Arlie cannot have a relationship with a father unless I deny myself. So there, Jesus, he had a choice. Jesus could either concentrate on what he deserved, or he could concentrate on giving you what you needed. And what he did was he denied himself, turned away from what it is that he deserved, so that you and I could have a relationship with the Father. So the call of the cross here says that Jesus denied himself in order to give us what we needed. And so like Jesus, what we're told here back in Matthew 16 is that we have to deny ourselves in order to follow him. If I'm going to say yes to Jesus, that means I'm going to have to say no to myself. Did you pick up on the song that we sang this morning? What was the first line of that song? All of self, none of thee. By the time you get to the end of that song, what were we saying? None of self and all of thee. That's what it means to deny yourself. So when Jesus said, look, if you're going to be mindful of the things of God, you're going to have to deny yourself. You're going to have to say no to some things. So the cross then becomes a symbol of our total denial of self and our willingness then to give ourselves completely over to Jesus and be willing to look at our relationship with him in an objective way and say, Lord, just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what I have to give up. I just want to have a relationship with you. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He denied himself. Do you think he wanted to do that? We could turn over to, we don't have time, but we could turn over to Matthew chapter 26 in the prayer in the garden where he was praying to God and he said, let this cup pass from me. What did he mean when he said that? David, what did he mean when he said that? He didn't want to do it? Is there any other way we can pull this off? I don't want to go through with this. But then how did he end that? Nevertheless, not my will, but your will. And that's what denying yourself means. If we're going to follow Jesus, we have to be willing to say, there's things that I want, and I might want them pretty bad, but Lord, I want your will to be done, and not mine. And that is hard for us to do sometimes, because sometimes we want stuff. We want things. And so it means that maybe sometimes you might be tempted to take a job that you know good and well is not going to be good for you spiritually. And they might dangle all kinds of carrots in front of you and say, well, you can make this kind of money and we'll work around your schedule. And there's all kinds of perks that go into this, but you know good and well that this is not an environment that you need to be in. It's going to take you away from worship. And they're asking you to do things that are not ethical. But boy, the money's good. Yes, sir.
Back in verse 21, when he said, he began to
So this total denial of ourselves, that doesn't mean that, that we have to be miserable all the time, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit later on. But we just need to understand that if we're going to say yes to Jesus, we got to say no to ourselves in a lot of areas. So why is this so important? Let's go here to this next point, to the explanation of the cross. Let's read this down here a little bit further. For whosoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? So the reason that this being able to deny ourselves is so important is explained for us in this verse. What Jesus is doing is he's explaining that ultimately we have a choice between two worlds. We can either follow Jesus or we can follow the world. And our problem as human beings sometimes is that we want to mesh the two. And Jesus is saying, you can't do that. You got to make a choice. This way is Virginia. This way is Florida. What would you think if I told you I'm going to go to Virginia and Florida at the same time? You can't do that. When I take a step towards Virginia, that means I'm taking a step away from Florida. If I take a step towards Florida, that means I'm taking a step away from Virginia. And it's the same way when it comes to comparing what Jesus has to offer and what the world has to offer. You have to make a choice. And Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, you cannot serve two masters. It's impossible. But boy, I tell you what, it is amazing the way we try to do that sometimes, isn't it? Like that young lady I was talking about that decided to go to the lake on Sundays, and she had it all worked out in her mind as to how it is that the Lord was going to be pleased with her because she was going to do that. These are two opposite directions, and we need to get that thought firmly in our minds, that when we're talking about following Jesus or following the world, those are two opposite things, and you cannot combine the two. You cannot combine the two. It's just not possible. So if you decide to live for your own purposes, it pushes you away from God because you're focusing on the things of man. You're focusing on your own purposes. Most of us in here have choices that we have to make every day. And one of the things that I try to do is when I'm faced with an important choice, I'm not talking about something insignificant like what shirt to wear or whatever. I'm talking about important choices. I always try to look at it and say, what is the best thing to do spiritually? And what you're going to find is that when it comes to these important choices in life, you're going to make it based on one of two things. You're either going to do what you want or you're going to do what's best. Now, sometimes doing what you want and doing what's best is the same thing. Those decisions are easy to make. But when you're faced with a decision that what you want to do and what you know is best is two different things, that takes discipline. I had a situation that illustrates this point very well years and years ago where I decided that I wanted to get a new truck. And so I was looking at trucks and found one that I kind of liked, and it was a new truck, and the interest rate was pretty cheap, and it fit everything that I needed. I called my accountant. I was going to get kind of close to the end of the year. I called my accountant, and he said, I don't think that's a good idea. He said, you've got some tax bills coming up, and he gave 3 or 4 reasons. He says, that's not what I would do. So there I was. I was faced with the decision. I wanted that truck. But the accountant said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And a couple of years later, so I didn't do it. I took his advice. I didn't do it. I kept mine going. A couple of years later, I felt like the business was doing, a lot better. And I called the accountant and I said, what do you think about me buying a new truck? He says, you need to go out and buy a new truck. You need that write-off. Well, now then, that decision's easy to make, because what I want and what's best is the same thing. And so my advice to all of you is that whenever you're looking at a situation wherein you have to make a significant decision, always look at it in terms of, okay, here's what I want, and here's what's best. And try to develop the discipline in your life to go for what's best and put aside what you want. That's hard to do. I'm proof of that. Because when I want something, I kind of want it. I was talking to a young lady just not long ago, and we were talking about her wanting a boyfriend. And she made the comment to me, well, at this point, I'm open to anything. And I thought, that's not the answer I want to hear. And I said to her, when you find a boy that you want to date, you need to ask yourself one question. And what that question is how can this guy help me get to heaven? And if the answer is he can't, then you need to kick him to the curb and you need to move on to somebody else. And her daddy was standing right there next to him, and he was nodding in agreement. And relationships are absolutely primed for making the wrong decision. They are absolutely primed to do that. We can allow ourselves to fall for somebody, and all of a sudden, he can be cute or she can be sweet, and there's all these things that say, oh, this is the one. But if they can't help you get to heaven, you need to rethink that. You need to rethink that. So don't live your life for your own purposes. It pushes you away from God. This should make sense to us, because God is showing us through Jesus what it means to live for his purposes as opposed to our own. I said a minute ago, what benefit was it for Jesus to go to the cross? What benefit was it for him? He didn't get any benefit out of that. He had to give things up. He had to deny himself. And so what he's showing us is that's what it means to be committed to God. That's what it means to be committed to Jesus. You have to deny yourself. And the thing about it is that a lot of the things that kind of tempt us and that maybe might get us into a bad situation when we start making decisions like that, they don't last that long. I talked about this truck that I bought. It was a brand new truck. After about 2 weeks, the excitement started to kind of wear off. How many of you experienced that? Yeah, that's what happens. You go and you convince yourself that you want this or you want to do that, and you go or you do, and then it's over. And all you're just left with the memory. And sometimes we invest so much time and so much mental effort in trying to do all of these mental gymnastics to try to talk ourselves into why it's okay. And it's not. I'm gonna make another example here that may offend some of you, but I'll take that chance. How many people have ever been to Disney World? Okay, a lot of us. Disney World is fun, right? I wasn't really planning on saying this, but when I saw the picture of Disney World on the screen this morning, I thought, okay, that would be a good example, because I went to Disney World. I've been to Disney World a couple of times. Went with my family, and we wanted to go on this roller coaster. And so we go up to this roller coaster, and the line is long. And so, being the analytical person that I am, I get my phone out and I start the timer. And I'm going to time how much time I have to spend in this line. And so I hit the timer, and I'm waiting there in line, and we're looking around, we're doing whatever. I was in that line 45 minutes. We get up to the front of the line. I get in the little car thing, and I reset my timer, and I hit it again because I'm going to time how long the ride is. This is a true story. You know how long the ride was? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. In business we talk about ROI. You know what ROI is? Return on investment. I spent 45 minutes for a 3-minute ride. That's not a good ROI. And so what we do sometimes is we want that moment of pleasure, whatever that is, whatever that relationship is, whatever that vehicle is, whatever that purchase is, that we know is only going to last for a few minutes, and what we're able to do, or what we're willing to do, is we're willing to trade that for eternity. That's a bad ROI. Deny yourself. Have the discipline to deny yourself. What is the point of gaining everything in this life if you're going to lose everything when you die?
I'll give another example, Alan, is if a person applies for a job and it's a good salary, but you're required to work on a Sunday or a Wednesday, now you've got to make a decision. Is that what you want to do? Are you denying yourself?
Right. Right.
That job, or you deny yourself?
Yeah. And I'm sure that there's probably people sitting here in this auditorium that have been faced with that before. The excitement doesn't last all that long. Even if you took this job and you made a lot of money, at some point it just becomes old hat. The excitement never lasts. That's the nature of worldly things. The excitement doesn't last.
You got to make sure you don't make a knee-jerk reaction.
Okay. Well, the thing about it is that God made us, so He knows what pleases us. He knows what we enjoy, right? He knows that we might enjoy this, that, or the other thing. But He also knows that these things only last just a few minutes. So if God has the ability to know what it is that might excite me or what might interest me, imagine what He can do with eternity. Just imagine that for a minute. We're not talking about an event where I'm involving myself in it, and then it's no big deal after that because I've done it. We're talking about eternity, and what God has promised is eternal satisfaction that never wanes, that never goes away, that never dissipates. Isn't that worth giving up a few things here in this world? So just because we deny ourselves these things, that doesn't mean that we have to be miserable. The message of the cross then is not just that Jesus died for us, it's that we are willing to die for Him. We're willing to deny ourselves and do what He needs to do, not for our own purposes, but Lord, show me the part I need to play in your overall scheme of things. What I want, Lord, is your purposes to be done. Show me my little part in that. Reveal that to me. Give me the wisdom, give me the insight to figure out what that is. It might not be standing up here teaching a class. It might not be that. But it might be something else. It might be something insignificant. Every one of you in here has a talent or an ability that you can use for the Lord's purpose. Every one of you does. And what you need to do is you need to ask yourself, are you doing that? Be objective with what it is that you can do. Nobody's asking you to do something that you can't do. But what you can do, make sure you do it. Make sure that whatever it is, that whatever blessing that God has given you, whatever talent God has given you, that you're using it for that purpose. Now, a lot of times, what time are the kids coming back in?
45. You have
You have about 15 minutes. Okay. Let's talk about the promise of the cross, because I think maybe the picture that I painted here is maybe sometimes what the Lord or what the world wants you to think is that what God is basically wanting us to do, He wants us to be unhappy and miserable here, and then He's going to reward us later. But that's not the way that God frames it. Look at these last two verses here in verse 27 and 28. Let's read those. For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Assuredly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now we're talking about reward. Just a few verses before we were talking about denying ourselves. Now we're talking about reward. What Jesus is, he's the promise of the cross. Jesus denied himself because we needed him. Jesus denied himself, but he said, look at what happens to me. I'm going to deny myself. I'm going to be killed. I'm going to go to the cross because you need it, but what is the end result of that? I'm going to be raised up to glory. That's what he says here in verse 27, 28. So he's the proof of the promise. If you deny yourself, there's going to be a reward. But here's the thing, and we'll kind of finish up with this point. God is not asking you to do anything that's not good for you. God is not asking you to do anything that's not good for you. The restrictions that he puts on you, the rules that he puts in place, he does that because they're good for us. If you want to have successful relationships, then what you need to do is you need to deny yourself and put that relationship ahead of what you want. David and I were talking to a young couple just yesterday, and they were asking for some marriage advice, and one of the things that we told them, it's about the relationship. It's about the marriage. What we have is we have two people in this relationship. You need to think of yourself as one flesh, and every decision that you make is based on what's best for the marriage. Well, sometimes that's opposed to what I might want personally. But you make decisions based on what's best for the relationship. That's a spiritual principle. And so when God says, I want you to be sexually pure in your dating relationship, I want you to be sexually pure, that's good for you. Now sometimes we just let ourselves get carried away and we do what we want to do, and we don't take the time to think about, what should I do? Sometimes we're just too willing to trade these short-term pleasures for what it's going to cost us in eternity. I'm sure a lot of you have probably been up to the Biltmore, right? Now, I would much rather go to the Biltmore than to go to Disney World. And I can go to the Biltmore and I can look around and I just see things there that just blow my mind. The precision, the engineering, the creativity, the craftsmanship. I look around there and I think, wow, the time that it took, the talent that it took. That place is just amazing to me. But a human made it. A human made that. And I'm amazed by that. Think about what God can create in eternity and how amazing that can be. So when we say the promise of the cross, what we're saying is that if you will focus and commit yourself to Jesus 100% and deny yourself, take up your cross and follow him, Jesus says, I am proof. I denied myself. I gave up everything. I did that for you, but I'm going to come back in glory. And if we deny ourselves and follow Jesus and do what he says and be absolutely committed and be willing to deny ourselves as well, then there will be a reward for us. And in the end, when we're there, then these petty little insignificant things that we were tempted with back when we were on earth will seem like nothing.